I once worked as a child protection officer in a small town. One day, a report landed on my desk about a mother who had allegedly kidnapped her own child. The case was handed over to me by my supervisor. When I spoke to the child's teacher, she mentioned that the child had come to school with a note that read, "Mommy says we're going on a long trip." The note was odd, and the child's demeanor had changed drastically. Without diving into the specifics, it was clear that something was amiss. The child had been living with her father after a bitter custody battle, and the mother had limited visitation rights. We dispatched a team to the father's house while I and another colleague tried to contact the mother. When we finally got her on the phone, her voice was cold and distant. She claimed she had every right to take her child, and that we had no authority over her. When we informed her of the legal repercussions, she snapped, "If you come after me, you'll regret it." The call ended abruptly, leaving us in a state of shock. The next day, we were in court presenting the case. My supervisor thought it best I stay away due to the mother's threats. My colleague who attended the hearing told me that the mother had sent a representative, who repeatedly asked, "Where's that nosy officer who's poking around?" It's not unusual to face resistance in this line of work, but this felt different. I was relieved when the child was safely located at a relative's house out of state. However, the mother was nowhere to be found. 2 weeks later, after a late-night meeting, I was heading to my car in the dimly lit parking lot. As I approached, I noticed a faint silhouette near my vehicle. My heart raced. I paused, trying to shake off the paranoia. But then, a soft whisper reached my ears, "Stay away." I bolted back inside and called the police. They found a small locket on the ground next to my car, a picture of the mother and child inside. The following week, a letter arrived at the office. It was addressed to me. Our receptionist, a kind elderly woman, opened it. The message was chilling. "You can't protect everyone." The typed words sent shivers down my spine. Over the next few months, more letters arrived, each more threatening than the last. Despite the police's efforts, they couldn't trace the sender. My life became a series of fearful nights and anxious days. One evening, as I was driving home, I noticed a car tailing me. Its headlights would occasionally dim, only to come back brighter. I took a convoluted route, trying to lose the car, but it persisted. In desperation, I drove to the police station. As I pulled in, the car sped past, but not before I caught a glimpse of the driver. It was the mother. The threats continued, even as the world went into lockdown due to a pandemic. Working from home, I felt a bit safer, but the letters didn't stop. They became infrequent but more sinister. A year later, I left the Child Protection Agency, hoping to leave the past behind. The child is now safe with her father, and the mother, though still at large, remains a haunting figure in my memories. Every shadow, every whisper reminds me of that chilling case on Maple Street. Months after leaving the agency, I tried to rebuild my life in a new city. I took up a job in a private firm, hoping the anonymity would shield me. However, the past has a way of catching up. One evening, as I was leaving my new office, I found a familiar-looking locket on my car's windshield. It was the same one from before. Inside was a new picture, this time of the mother, with a message scribbled on the back, "You can run, but you can't hide." I immediately contacted the local police, explaining my history with the mother and the threats I'd received. They offered protection and began an investigation. Surveillance cameras around my office showed a woman, hooded and masked, placing the locket on my car. The police believed it was the mother, but without a clear face, they couldn't be certain. A week later, I received an anonymous email. The message was a link to a website. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. The site was a collage of pictures and news articles about me. There were photos from my childhood, my college years, and even recent ones from my new job. The level of stalking was beyond anything I could have imagined. The website had a countdown timer, ominously ticking away. It was set for 3 days from then. I informed the police, who tried to trace the website's origin. They found it was hosted on a server, bouncing its location across multiple countries, making it nearly impossible to track. The countdown weighed heavily on my mind. What would happen when it reached 0? 2 days later, a package arrived at my doorstep. Inside was a small voice recorder. When I pressed play, a distorted voice said, "Meet me at the old pier at midnight when the timer runs out, or everyone you care about will suffer." The police advised against going, but I felt trapped. They devised a plan to accompany me in plain clothes, hoping to catch her in the act. The night arrived, and the pier, bathed in the pale moonlight, looked eerily desolate. As the clock neared midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was her. She approached, her face hidden beneath a hood. "You shouldn't have interfered," she hissed. Before I could respond, the police swooped in, catching her off guard. A struggle ensued, and she was finally apprehended. Underneath the hood, however, was not the face I expected. It was the face of the mother's sister. In custody, she revealed that she believed I had wronged her sister and was seeking revenge. The mother had been in a mental institution all along, her mind deteriorating after losing custody of her child. The sister, blinded by rage and grief, had taken it upon herself to exact vengeance. The ordeal was finally over, but the scars it left were indelible. I moved again, seeking solace in a place far removed from the memories of Maple Street and the haunting shadows of a vendetta gone awry. In a quiet suburb of Chicago, nestled among the sprawling trees and manicured lawns, was Elmwood Drive. The houses here were old, with histories stretching back decades. Sarah, a woman in her 30s, had recently moved into one of these homes, seeking a fresh start after a tumultuous few years as a child protection worker in the city. Sarah's job had been emotionally draining. She had seen the worst of humanity and had been threatened more times than she could count. But one case stood out. A report had come through about a stepfather in the city who was being abusive. Sarah had been the one to investigate, and the horrors she uncovered still haunted her dreams. The stepfather had been particularly vindictive. After Sarah had ensured his children were taken into protective custody, he had started stalking her. Threatening letters arrived at her office, and she would often see a dark green Camry following her on her way home. The police had been of little help. They said that without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. Sarah had felt trapped, constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at every shadow. So she had decided to move away to Elmwood Drive, hoping the distance would keep her safe. The first few weeks had been peaceful. The neighbors were friendly, and Sarah had started to feel like she could finally relax. But one evening, as she was settling down with a book, she heard a knock on her door. Glancing out the window, she saw a familiar dark green Camry parked on the street. Her heart raced as she approached the door, peering through the peephole. Standing there was a man she didn't recognize, but the malicious glint in his eyes was all too familiar. He knocked again, louder this time. Sarah backed away, her mind racing. She had moved here to escape this nightmare, but it seemed it had followed her. She needed to act fast. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, whispering her address and explaining the situation. The operator assured her that help was on the way, but Sarah knew she needed to buy some time. She ran to the back of the house, locking all the doors and windows. As she did, she could hear the man trying to force his way in. He was shouting, demanding she come out and face him. Sarah hid in her bedroom, barricading the door with furniture. She could hear the man moving through the house, getting closer. But then sirens pierced the night and the man's footsteps retreated. The police arrived quickly, arresting the man. It turned out he was an associate of the stepfather from Sarah's case. He had been hired to track her down and intimidate her. Sarah was shaken but grateful to be alive. She realized that no matter where she went, her past might always catch up with her. But she also knew she was strong and would always fight to protect herself and the children she had vowed to help. The next day, Sarah installed a security system and reached out to a therapist to help her process her trauma. She was determined to reclaim her life and her peace, one day at a time. Sarah's life on Elmwood Drive began to settle into a routine. The arrest of the man had made local news, and the community rallied around her. Neighbors would often drop by with homemade meals, ensuring she never felt alone. Elmwood Drive was proving to be the sanctuary she had hoped for. One evening, as Sarah was returning from a therapy session, she noticed a group of kids playing on the street. Among them was a little girl named Emily, who lived a few houses down. Emily approached Sarah with a drawing in her hand. It was a picture of a house with a big sun and two figures standing side by side. "This is you and me," Emily said with a bright smile. Sarah was touched. She had always had a soft spot for children, which was one of the reasons she had chosen her line of work. She knelt down and thanked Emily, promising to hang the drawing on her fridge. Sarah and Emily developed a close bond. They would often spend afternoons together, with Sarah helping Emily with her homework or the two of them baking cookies. Emily's innocence and joy were a balm to Sarah's wounded soul. However, one evening as they were playing in Sarah's backyard, Emily grew quiet. She looked up at Sarah with serious eyes. "I hear things," she whispered, "whispers in the night." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of whispers?" she asked gently. Emily looked around as if afraid someone might overhear. "They talk about you," she said. "They say they're watching." Sarah's heart raced. Could it be possible that the stepfather had more associates? Or was this something else entirely? She decided to speak to Emily's parents, hoping they might have some answers. Emily's parents were concerned but also skeptical. "Kids have wild imaginations," her father said. "Maybe she's just picking up on the stress from the recent events." As Sarah left, she felt a mix of anger and fear. She realized that the battle was far from over. The stepfather's family was wealthy and influential, and they were determined to clear his name at any cost. Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. She began her own investigation, delving into the family's background. She discovered a web of corruption and deceit, with ties to organized crime and shady business dealings. With the help of a journalist friend, Sarah began to expose the family's secrets. The story made headlines, and public opinion turned against the stepfather's family. The pressure became too much for them, and they eventually dropped their vendetta against Sarah. As the dust settled, Sarah felt a sense of vindication. She had stood up to her tormentors and come out on top. She had also uncovered a larger story of corruption that had far-reaching implications. Sarah's life on Elmwood Drive gradually returned to normal. She continued her work in child protection, using her experiences to advocate for stronger laws and better support for victims. She also became a pillar of the community, using her newfound fame to champion various causes. Through it all, Sarah remained close to Emily and her family. They had been her rock during the darkest times, and she was forever grateful for their support. The echoes of Elmwood Drive would always be a part of her, but they no longer defined her. She had emerged stronger and more determined than ever to make a difference in the world. I'm a man in my late 20s, living in a cozy apartment in the heart of Dublin. The building is old, with creaky wooden floors and a maze of hallways that lead to various apartments. It's rare to see strangers here, mostly just the familiar faces of neighbors and the occasional delivery person. I know most of the people in the building, their routines, and even the sounds of their footsteps. This eerie tale began on a winter evening a few years ago. I was working from home, engrossed in my work, when around 7 p.m. I heard a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I peeked through the peephole. There stood a man, probably in his 60s, wearing an old-fashioned suit and hat, reminiscent of the 1940s. He looked out of place, like a character from a black-and-white movie. I hesitated, but then opened the door. He introduced himself as Patrick, and asked if Thomas lived here. I told him no. I'd been living here for over 3 years and had never heard of a Thomas. He looked genuinely puzzled and mentioned that Thomas was his old friend, and they used to live in this building together during their youth. I felt a bit sorry for him, thinking maybe he was just confused, but then he handed me an old photograph. It showed 2 young men, one of whom looked eerily similar to me. The other, presumably Patrick, looked exactly like the man at my door, just younger. He insisted that the man in the photo was Thomas and that they used to live here in the 1940s. I was taken aback. How could this man, who looked no older than 60, have lived here over 80 years ago? I tried to reason with him, suggesting he might be mistaken, but he became agitated. He began to accuse me of hiding Thomas and demanded to see him. I was getting nervous. I told him I'd call the police if he didn't leave. He stared at me for a moment, then with a sad look turned and left. I quickly locked the door and tried to shake off the eerie feeling. A few days later, I mentioned the encounter to my elderly neighbor, Mrs. O'Brien. She went pale when I described the man and showed her the photograph. She told me that Patrick and Thomas did live in the building, but it was during the 1940s. They were best friends, but one day Thomas disappeared under mysterious circumstances and was never found. Patrick was devastated and moved away shortly after. Mrs. O'Brien then told me the most chilling part. Patrick had passed away a few years ago. I was in disbelief. Who had come to my door? Was it a relative of Patrick's, or had I encountered a ghost from the past? I never saw the man again, but every so often, late at night, I'd hear a knock on my door. When I'd check, no one would be there. But sometimes I'd find an old photograph on my doorstep. I eventually moved out of the apartment, unable to shake the eerie feeling. But to this day, I wonder who or what I encountered that evening, and what really happened to Thomas all those years ago. The streets of New York City were unusually quiet for a Friday night. The neon lights of Times Square flickered in the distance as Emily made her way home from her late night shift at the diner. She always took the same route home, passing by the old bookstore, the closed-down theater, and the alley where street artists displayed their work during the day. Tonight, however, something felt off. As she approached the alley, she noticed a tall figure standing in the shadows, seemingly observing one of the murals. Thinking it was just another late-night wanderer, she continued walking. But as she passed the alley, she felt a cold breeze and heard a whisper, "Beautiful night, isn't it?" She turned to see the stranger now standing closer, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. Trying to keep her composure, Emily replied, "Yes, it is," and quickened her pace. But every few steps, she'd hear his footsteps echoing hers. She decided to take a detour, hoping to lose him. She darted into a 24-hour convenience store and pretended to browse. Through the store window, she saw the stranger stop outside, waiting. Emily approached the store clerk, a young guy probably in his early 20s. "There's someone following me," she whispered, pointing subtly to the man outside. The clerk, Jake, nodded and walked over to the entrance, striking up a conversation with the stranger. Emily used this distraction to slip out the back door. She ran a few blocks, her heart pounding, until she reached her apartment building. Fumbling with her keys, she quickly entered and locked the door behind her. Safe in her apartment, she peered out the window. The street below was empty. Relieved, she began to unwind, thinking the ordeal was over. But just as she was about to head to bed, a knock echoed through her apartment. Hesitant, she approached the door and looked through the peephole. It was Jake, the store clerk. Confused, she opened the door slightly. "Hey, I just wanted to make sure you got home okay," Jake said, looking genuinely concerned. Emily, still on edge, replied, "Thanks, but how did you know where I live?" Jake hesitated. I saw your address on the loyalty card application at the store. I just wanted to make sure you were safe." Emily, although grateful, felt a new wave of unease. "Thanks, Jake, I'm okay now," she said, slowly closing the door. Emily tried to shake off the unease, telling herself she was overreacting. She decided to take a hot shower, hoping it would calm her nerves. The steam enveloped her, and for a moment she felt a sense of relief. But as she stepped out, wiping the foggy mirror, she froze. Written in the condensation were the words, "Beautiful night, isn't it?" Panicking, Emily quickly dressed and grabbed her phone, dialing the police. As she waited on the line, she heard a faint scratching sound coming from her living room. She tiptoed to the door, peering through the slight opening. The silhouette of the stranger from the alley was visible, his hat still obscuring his face. He seemed to be tracing something on her window. Suddenly, the lights in Emily's apartment flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through her. She remembered the old fire escape outside her bedroom window. Quietly, she made her way there, praying the stranger wouldn't hear her. But as she reached for the window latch, a chilling hand grabbed her wrist. She turned to see a tall, shadowy figure looming over her. Adrenaline pumping, Emily tried to scream, but the stranger's other hand clamped over her mouth, muffling her cries. Their eyes locked, his filled with a cold, predatory intent. She struggled fiercely, using every ounce of strength to free herself. Her elbow connected with his stomach, causing him to momentarily loosen his grip. Seizing the opportunity, Emily let out a piercing scream. The sound echoed through the apartment, and almost immediately there was a loud banging on her front door. The stranger, momentarily distracted, loosened his grip on her. Emily pushed him away with all her might, screaming for help. The door burst open, revealing Jake, his face a mask of concern. Seeing the situation, he lunged at the stranger, tackling him to the ground. The two grappled, but Jake managed to pin the intruder down. Emily, shaking and gasping for breath, rushed to the phone and dialed 911. Within minutes, the wailing sirens of police cars filled the night. Officers stormed into the apartment, handcuffing the stranger. As they led him away, one of the officers approached Emily. "Ma'am, do you know this man?" he asked, pointing to Jake. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He saved me," she whispered. The following days were a whirlwind of police reports and statements. It was revealed that the stranger had a history of break-ins and assaults in the area. Jake's timely intervention had prevented another tragedy. Grateful for her life, Emily decided to move to a safer neighborhood. She also enrolled in self-defense classes, vowing never to feel helpless again. The harrowing experience had changed her, but it also ignited a fire within her to advocate for personal safety and community vigilance. The city lights of Chicago shimmered in the distance as I, Olivia, made my way home from a late-night study session at the library. The streets were quieter than usual, with only the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustling of leaves. I always took the same route home, passing by the old coffee shop, the park with the vintage carousel, and the underpass covered in vibrant graffiti. Tonight, however, a chilling sense of unease settled over me. As I approached the underpass, I noticed a van parked on the side, its engine running but lights off. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the nagging feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly, a hand clamped over my mouth, pulling me into the shadows. I tried to scream, but the sound was muffled by the stranger's grip. Panic surged through me as I realized I was being dragged towards the van. Using every ounce of strength, I stomped on the stranger's foot and bit down hard on his hand. He yelped in pain, releasing his grip momentarily. I took the chance to break free, sprinting away with all my might. I could hear the stranger's heavy footsteps behind me, closing in. Desperate, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, leaving the call connected in my pocket, hoping they'd trace my location. Spotting a nearby alley, I darted in, hiding behind a dumpster. I held my breath, listening intently. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. The stranger was searching for me. Minutes felt like hours. Just when I thought I was safe, a shadow loomed over me. The stranger had found me, but before he could make a move, a chilling voice echoed through the alley. "You're late with the delivery." I froze, recognizing the voice. It was Alex, my ex-boyfriend. The chilling voice of Alex echoed again. "You always were too predictable, Olivia." I could hear the smirk in his voice. The stranger, now identifiable as one of Alex's shady friends from college, grabbed my arm tightly, pulling me further into the alley's shadows. "Why are you doing this, Alex?" I managed to choke out, tears streaming down my face. He stepped closer, the dim light revealing a face hardened by bitterness. "Your father's empire ruined my family. It's only fair he pays, one way or another." The weight of his words crushed me. I remembered the stories of Alex's family business going bankrupt, but to think he'd blame my father and resort to this was unimaginable. I tried to break free, but the stranger's grip was unyielding. "Let's make this easy, Olivia. Call your father. Tell him if he wants to see his precious daughter again, he'll pay." Desperation surged through me. "Alex, please, this isn't you. We can find another way." He scoffed. "It's too late for that." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the alley. A stray cat had knocked over some trash cans. The distraction was brief, but it was enough. I stomped on the stranger's foot, causing him to momentarily release his grip. I made a run for it. Their footsteps were close behind, their threats growing louder. Just as I thought I'd lost them, strong hands grabbed me, pulling me into a vehicle. The world became a blur as I was driven to an unknown location. I found myself in an old abandoned cabin, tied to a rickety chair. Alex's face loomed over mine, his eyes cold and unrecognizable. "Your father will pay for what he's done," he sneered. Hours turned into days. My father received a ransom call, demanding a hefty sum for my release. The police were on it, trying to trace the call, gathering any evidence they could find. But time was running out. The cabin grew colder, the threats more violent. Then silence. Days felt like weeks. Hope was fading. When the police finally located the cabin, they broke down the door. Inside, amidst the chilling silence, they found me, Olivia, lifeless. A tragic end to a nightmare that seemed endless. The city was in shock. The news of the betrayal by someone I once loved added layers to the tragedy. The horrifying ordeal served as a stark reminder of the dangers lurking even in familiar faces, and the depths of darkness revenge can plunge a person into. In the shadows of the night, if our tales from unsettling horror stories gave you a fright, press like and let it be known. Subscribe, so you're never alone in this haunting journey, and share, so others too can be wary. Until our next sinister tale, stay dark, dear listener.